If you knew that any semblance of democracy as we know it in the United States only had 6 more months before it was gone, what would you be doing right now? Would you be getting your passport together, searching websites to see what immigration laws and naturalization laws are in other countries with plans to move out? Would you be organizing locally, gathering as many people as you could to respond to the threat? Would you kind of keep your head down, hoping that it all blows over and goes away? Whatever you decide to do, I hope you knew that if democracy was on a lifeline, you would choose to take action. That's the situation we find ourselves in today. We are on the roadmap to ruin, but we need to talk about what the church can do to resist the dismantling of democracy. My name is Dr. Jemar Tisby. I have a PhD in history, a master's of divinity in theology. I'm an author of The Color of Compromise and How to Fight Racism. And my latest book is The Spirit of Justice, True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. I'm also a national speaker, and I have the opportunity to go across the country, speak at different churches, universities, and organizations. I meet incredible people along the way. But there's a pattern, a troubling pattern that I see emerging, which is I'm not quite sure that people, church folk in particular, understand the gravity of the moment. I'm not sure that enough people recognize the peril that we're in. I mentioned a moment ago, what if democracy only had about 6 months? Well, that might be generous. We could be looking at a matter of weeks. And history will look back on this moment and will ask, where was the church? We have the opportunity, the necessity, the obligation to respond in this moment. My burden in this series, The Roadmap to Ruin, is just coming from a place like you of looking around our political landscape and wondering, what can I do? What can be my contribution in this moment? So, quite simply, as a scholar and a researcher, I have my head down studying this stuff all day. But you have a day job. And to be honest, we shouldn't have to pay this much attention to what our government is doing. I mean, if it's functioning the way it should be, then we should trust that stuff is happening. I mean, trust but verify, but we live in a representative democracy. We elect representatives and we should be able to count on them to serve the people. But what's happening right now, we have to pay very, very close attention to, because the rug is being pulled out from under democracy as we speak. So I figured, well, I have an education, I have the research, I have some of the knowledge that you need, and maybe I can be a bridge between the scholarship and the church. And that's what I can do. That's why I'm sharing these videos. But throughout this series, you have to ask what you can do. What are you uniquely equipped and positioned to be able to do in this moment? Have that going in the back of your mind as you listen to this series. I'm an educator at heart, and my hope is this information will motivate you to action, whatever that looks like. And as we go along, we need the right information to take the right action. Folks, this is not a lot of good news. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if we don't know the truth, then we won't be able to respond effectively. So let's look forward in and lean forward into this content with courage. Now, some of you may be saying, well, Jamar, you're overreacting. Like, it's bad, but it's not that bad. Come on. Well, let me talk about some signs of ruin. Since January 20th, 2025, we've been under this, what I would call a political regime. I don't call it an administration because I don't think they're very interested in administrating effectively. It seems like they're more bent on dismantling and destroying or turning the levers of power to serve them and not serve the people. And if you think I'm overreacting, let's look at what's happened in just the first couple of months of this new regime. So, on the symbolic end, sort of, renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, making English the official language in a very multiracial, multilingual society is asserting something. I'm looking very carefully at this anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion movement that is gutting programs across the country, beginning in the federal government. There was an executive order titled Ending Illegal Discrimination and Restoring Merit-Based Opportunity, which effectively dismantled anything that they labeled DEI in the federal government, but also beyond. As we speak, there are more than 50 colleges and universities that are under investigation for so-called violations of this executive order and new direction around DEI. It's had a chilling effect in sectors across the spectrum on any programs designed to foster the inclusion of historically marginalized groups. It's even led to the dismantling of the Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, D.C. That's not all. There was an executive order restoring the federal death penalty. And this included a mandate that you must use the death penalty in any case where a migrant is convicted of a death penalty eligible crime. There's a move to end birthright citizenship. This is part of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. You don't get any higher in terms of a law than what we put into the Constitution. And this was an amendment. This was part of the Reconstruction Amendments after the Civil War. It was originally designed to make sure that Black people recently freed from slavery would actually be counted as citizens in the United States. And now they're talking about ending birthright citizenship. The president pardoned anyone convicted of a crime for what they did during the January 6th insurrection when they stormed the Capitol. There is right now, what's happening geopolitically across the globe is a complete disruption of the post-World War II alliances and allegiances that we saw. Historic allies are being made and turned on, by the United States into enemies. The president has threatened or actually implemented tariffs on a number of countries that will actually have the effect of raising prices on US consumers. The price falls to us. One of the effects that thousands of people across the country and the world are feeling is the gutting of the US Agency for International Development, otherwise known as USAID. What this administration, what this regime has done is they've frozen billions of dollars in assets globally, and they've laid off thousands of contractors, and USAID is responsible for some life-saving programs. It is said that the region of the world that will be most adversely affected by these cuts is sub-Saharan Africa. More than 6 billion in funds went directly to sub-Saharan Africa. In total, the US spent about $40 billion in foreign aid in 2023, which is more than any other country, but that was only 1% of the federal budget. And these are the programs they're choosing to cut. We could go on and on and on, making Canada the 51st state, talks of acquiring Greenland in a throwback to old-fashioned imperialistic endeavors. There's a task force to eliminate so-called anti-Christian bias. There's a false claim. Now they're rewriting the story and saying that Ukraine invaded Russia and started the conflict rather than the truth, which is that Russia initiated the aggression. There's retribution that to people who the president thinks have harmed him or went after him unfairly. For instance, they fired the national archivist because that person and their staff alerted officials that the president had mishandled and kept classified documents. It goes on and on and on. And I think most chilling is the tendency, the growing tendency, to declare the president a king. If not calling him a king, then imbuing him with king-like unilateral powers. And this is coming from the president himself. He posted on social media a quote that said, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." The president can't break a law because he is working to save his country. So, by any means necessary, forget about freedom, forget about liberty, forget about democracy. He even posted a picture, an illustration of himself wearing a crown. So you tell me, am I overreacting? Is it hyperbole to call this the roadmap to ruin? Or maybe enough of us just haven't been paying close enough attention. That's what we're going to talk about in this series. Let me say a word to pastors, preachers, church leaders, because I run into a lot of people who are very hesitant to talk about politics, especially from the pulpit. But I'd like to propose to you there's a difference between being partisan and being political. I'm not encouraging anyone to get up there and say, as a good Christian, you must vote Democratic, you must vote Republican or independent or whatever. That's being partisan. It's literally taking a political side in our system. But that doesn't mean you can't talk about politics. Number one, I don't think you can avoid talking about politics even if you tried. Why? Because politics has to do with policies, and policies have to do with people. So I actually think it is part of your duty as a minister, as someone who's serving your congregation or your flock, to speak to their concerns. And could anyone honestly say that in their faith communities, what's happening politically right now isn't a matter of great and enormous concern? We have people who are affected by layoffs, people who are affected by budget cuts. We have people who are affected by these draconian immigration tactics. We have people just anxious and worried about the state of our country. What does it say if the pulpit is silent about what most concerns people? So I want to encourage you. We've sort of been conditioned to think that if we talk about the political atmosphere at all, it's off limits. It's not part of what should be happening in the church. But there's a difference between being partisan and being political. Full disclosure, though, we effectively have a two-party system, Democrats and Republicans. Right now, one of those parties, the Republicans, as far as elected political officials, is almost wholly given over to these anti-democratic authoritarian ends. And so we are constrained in our choices, but we can still talk about politics without necessarily trying to compel people toward a partisan end. So talk about this in the pulpit, in public, because it's part of serving your people. Let me put this as plainly as I can. The end game of this political regime is oligarchy. It is not a representative, inclusive democracy. This is not a government by the people and for the people. This is government by the ultra wealthy and for them alone. They don't really care what happens to the rest of us in the process of them acquiring and accumulating even more money and even more power. If you are counting on the midterm elections or the next presidential election, I've got bad news for you. Right now, they are co-opting the very democratic levers of power that we would use to bring in a new administration. In other words, we may not be able to trust and rely on the fact that we'll have a free and fair election next time. This is not business as usual. These are extraordinary times that call for extraordinary care. That's why you're here. Let's talk about the rest of the series and how it will help you. This whole series is called The Roadmap to Ruin: How the Church Can Resist the Dismantling of Democracy. Episode 1, The Roadmap to Ruin, is all about impressing upon you the urgency, the gravity, and the weight of this moment. We talked about all these different signs of ruin and how we need to understand what we're up against. Episode 2 is called The Architects of Ruin. We're going to talk about some of the organizations, some of the individuals that you may not hear about in the headlines, but are nonetheless pulling the strings of the dismantling of democracy. Episode 3 is called The Roadmap to White Christian Nationalism. This is where I'm in my bag. We talk about some history here and how the fact that this roadmap didn't come out of nowhere, but it's been paved brick by brick over the course of decades and even longer. And in the final episode, we will talk about the roadmap to resistance. We're going to talk about what we can do on a practical level, particularly as the church, to resist the dismantling of democracy. This is not a drill. This is not a history lesson. This is happening in real time. And the only question is, what are you going to do about it?